Welcome to the WORKOLOGY podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader. Join host Jessica Miller-Merrill, founder of WORKOLOGY.com, as she sits down and gets to the bottom of trends, tools, and case studies for the business leader, HR, and recruiting professional who is tired of the status quo. Now here's Jessica with this episode of WORKOLOGY.
In an increasingly global marketplace, diversity and inclusion are being recognized as a key component in business success. Research tells us that diverse and inclusive teams are smarter, more creative, and make better decisions. While an increasing number of organizations are embracing the notion of diversity, the practice of inclusion is often overlooked. Being respected, valued, and welcome to contribute equates to more than just good feelings. Humans have a biologically based need to belong, to feel included, supported, and valued by others. Today, we're diving more into the neuroscience and neuroinclusion and looking at what we can do more to achieve an inclusive workplace. I have a special guest today. His name is Steve Eisenberg, and welcome to the WORKOLOGY podcast, Steve.
Thanks, Jess. Glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's talk a little bit about your background first to kind of set the stage before we dive into neuroinclusion.
Be happy to. My background was related to digital media, more specifically focusing on social media and mobile telecommunications and mobile video. The function that I have some expertise in is business development. Trying to form partnerships between two or more entities and integrating products or services pertaining to mobile video. That's kind of my goal going forward. In the past, I've done some video production, appeared on national television, and I've worked for the Walt Disney Company for 7 years, in New York City, working on ABC television internet properties, doing client services, business development, and operations.
Awesome. And I love your expertise, and I was geeking out with Steve in the course of several conversations prior to recording this podcast, talking about mobile and search engine optimization, marketing. Like, he's very up to speed on digital topics and his consulting work and then his previous background in history. Outside of your work as a marketing expert, we are talking today about neuroinclusion. So first of all, let's talk about what neuroinclusion is and maybe why you have a stake in this topic so we can learn more about it.
Neuroinclusion is also known as neurodiversity in today's workplace. It pertains to changing the recruitment process in order to accommodate people with autism in particular. Other candidates have dyslexia, ADHD. Some people, such as myself, have a turbocharged brain. I can generate 20 ideas in 30 minutes towards solving business problems or generating revenue. It's important to me as a way to potentially get back into the workplace with an employer who accepts people like me. Diversity inclusion officers need to understand applicants that fall into the category we are discussing covers more than just computer programmers and needs to consider other job functions. Examples include marketing and business development.
On past podcasts, we've talked a lot about diversity, recruiting, hiring, and retention programs. How is inclusion different in your mind, from diversity?
Well, inclusion traditionally pertains to women and minorities. As a result, the framework at the federal level, enterprise-level companies need to follow. Diversity needs to expand into neuroinclusion, neurodiversity.
We've talked about neuroscience on the podcast recently with Dr. Britt Andreatta. She's talked a lot about neuroscience in terms of collaboration, teams, and innovation. Why is neuroinclusion different, or does it include some of the same or similar philosophies?
Yes, it does interact with neuroscience. People with autism and related diagnoses have brains with vast capabilities, but are wired differently than others in the workplace.
Interesting. So can you give us some examples of maybe being wired differently versus an employee who doesn't have a diagnosis versus maybe somebody like yourself or another individual?
Sure. Well, people have, in my case, let's say an extraordinary way of having a visual mind in order to remember things from many years ago, or for that matter, last week. So in order to kind of just absorb and observe in a particular environment and then formulate ideas and concepts around that. So I think people with dyslexia need to be given a chance, in addition to folks with autism, or sometimes I guess they're interconnected with each other, depending upon the person.
Let's take a little bit of a reset here. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill, and you're listening to the Workology podcast. Today we're talking about Neuroinclusion and also tackling the topic of autism hiring with Steve Eisenberg. You can connect with Steve on Twitter at Steve8004. I want to talk a little bit about CEOs and their kind of view and opinion of neurodiversity and the topic of diversity and inclusion. Research tells us that inclusion is an important topic, especially this year for CEOs. In 2017, the Deloitte HR Trends Report found that a proportion of executives who cited inclusion as a top priority has risen by 32% compared to their 2014 study. What type of things are you seeing in the workplace, Steve, as a job seeker and as an employee?
Acceptance of applicants that fall into the neurodiversity category with previous computer programming and basic data science skills are at the forefront of a new paradigm for recruiting.
So what you're saying is that right now, and I'm agreeing with you if we're on the same line here, that there's a lot of interest in diversity hiring, but it's particularly around autism. It's really focused on computer programmers and coders.
Correct. Yes. And it needs to expand into other job functions within the enterprise.
So what other areas do you see somebody who maybe is diagnosed with autism being able to contribute in the workplace?
Well, since data science is fairly well accepted, then job functions with some analytics and other types of research that pertains to data in order to go and justify a new concept or a pitch that's being done from one business unit to another are possibilities. So, or even for that matter in sales, depending upon the person's goals, if they are potential candidates that can meet quarterly quotas. So that's also another area of interest, probably should be of some interest to diversity officers.
Do you think job seekers and employees are seeing these changes themselves with the new CEO focus on diversity and inclusion?
Yes, it's hard to find companies that have autism recruitment processes. Business development and marketing professionals should be considered as job functions for people with these types of disabilities. My goal is to obtain a junior level opportunity combining business development, integrating mobile video products or services between two or more parties in order to generate revenue.
So you're seeing some movement, and we've talked a little bit about this in your job search and interest in finding a workplace that aligns with your career aspirations and your basic philosophies, but it's been really challenging for you to be able to find and apply for positions because there are mostly computer programmer roles with regard to these autism diversity programs, right?
Correct.
So diversity folks, look at expanding your diversity and inclusion programs beyond some of the programmer, coder, and look at data science, sales, marketing, any of these different areas for somebody like Steve and others to really excel at, because it's not just coding programs that folks who are diagnosed with autism are really great at. There's many different things, and depending upon their level of autism, you can see from or hear from talking to Stephen, he's great, and he has a lot of knowledge and can work in sales or marketing in a lot of different areas. And I think a lot of people make assumptions, maybe your managers do, on what someone can or can't do who is diagnosed as autistic.
Yes, I agree with that.
So what type of things would you like to see change in the workplace? If you had the opportunity to talk to the head of diversity or inclusion, let's pretend that we're talking to them right now, what type of suggestions would you have for them as someone who is diagnosed with autism? So pass your knowledge and your experience onto them so maybe they can make changes in their own workplace.
Well, sensitivity training for teams and managers comes to mind. Accommodations to allow extra time for completing tasks, or closer integration with a team to get certain routines completed. example spreadsheets, items related to logic, or very tight deadlines.
What do you think about the hiring process itself? Because I personally feel like that it is not designed for someone who has a disability to maybe excel at, especially if you're autistic and you don't prefer eye contact, or you get really nervous, or you have a twitch, or if you're diagnosed with Asperger's. What are your thoughts?
I'd say that, like in the case of Microsoft, the recruitment process is only over 5 days versus it might be stretched out to a couple of months. The larger the company, probably the longer it takes. And so, there are some accommodations even within just the hiring process that are different from what a normal candidate would go through.
What about advice for a job seeker, Steve? Because with this blog post that I've written that lists all the companies that have autism hiring programs, I've gotten a lot of comments, questions, phone calls from job seekers and their parents and caregivers looking for job search and career advice. What advice could you give them to help them maybe find that perfect job as you're on your own search for the perfect place for yourself?
First of all, I'd say that you really need to kind of just try to absorb as much information about the job function, the industry that you'd like to be in. Two is to find folks who help people with disabilities get placed into jobs. Try to listen to things like podcasts, find channels on YouTube to listen to, articles that related to neurodiversity, and just doing a lot of networking with folks in the diversity space, in addition to people and companies that you can get informational interviews with to talk about what's required to go forward and become a marketable candidate.
Let's talk a little bit about your strategy, because I met you through a connection that somebody networked and connected us. Talk about your approach and how you're using conferences and events and developing those relationships to help you in your own job search.
Well, networking is also really important in this type of situation because of folks with disabilities. Some companies that don't have neuroinclusion or neurodiversity programs, it's a harder sell to get in the door, and so going out and meeting people, or even if it's trying to get a phone meeting, of course, it's better in person, but and then just trying to take social selling as a way to develop relationships with these folks, find out what makes them tick, kind of the topics that they're interested in, have an impact on their company, and then go from there.
And what I love about you, Steve, is your dedication to this. I mean, you're flying all over the U.S. to attend conferences and events to make these connections with people who are interested in hiring diverse candidates and diverse employees, and making connections with those people, and with the end game of being able to find that right fit at the next company for you as an employee.
I think just to note that in some cases an approach is, well, if you don't have a program, maybe that I could come in, or myself or another job seeker, and provide a whole bunch of feedback based upon observing what goes on in their company and the area of interest that you want to work in, and then come back with recommendations on what could be done, what could be implemented, and then try to go and tie that together, and then work with the diversity officer to try to sell that into a decision maker for a business unit.
I love that. And I feel like you're the subject matter expert, as many listeners are if they're job seekers right now, because you're living that right now, and you're researching, and you are in the application process with companies, and understand the challenges and obstacles and opportunities that those companies have from the job seeker perspective that they might not even be thinking about for themselves.
I agree.
Well, Steve, thank you for joining us today. Where can people go to learn more about you and what you do?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn, and that my ID is Steve Eisenberg. So www.linkedin.com/in/Steve Eisenberg, Eisenberg.
Yeah, and we'll link to Steve's LinkedIn profile on the transcript as well, so you can just click and connect with him. Check him out on Twitter. He's active there, and maybe you can have him speak or attend your next conference or event, or sit down and talk with you about your diversity and inclusion programs at your company.
Thanks, Jessica. I really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you coming on board and kind of shining some light on this important topic of neuroinclusion, as well as the job seeker point of view on the diversity hiring process.
Thank you.
I've said before that diversity and inclusion has become a CEO level issue. Leading organizations now see diversity and inclusion as a comprehensive strategy woven into every aspect of the talent lifecycle to enhance employee engagement, improve brand, and drive performance. The era of diversity as a check-the-box program owned by HR is over. HR and operational leaders now have an opportunity to take ownership and drive accountability with the growing and continued support of executive leadership, including the CEO. I hope Steve's interview and thoughts on this topic has shed some light, especially as someone who has a disability himself and is also actively looking for work in the job market. We need to make it easier for job seekers to find those leading-edge diversity and inclusion-focused organizations. Thank you for joining the Workology podcast, a podcast for the disruptive workplace leader who's tired of the status quo. This is Jessica Miller-Merrill. Until next time, you can visit workology.com to listen to all our past episodes and access all our resources mentioned in this episode too. Have a great day.
Production services for the Workology podcast with Jessica Miller-Merrill provided by TotalPicture.com.